You see all this water here? Well, this is the San Joaquin River here in the Delta, and much of it is tainted with salt. But the governor says with new technology and with his plan, well, one day this could supply fresh water to the region.
We can't do the same damn thing anymore.
That was Governor Gavin Newsom's message today as he addressed the state's response to the ongoing drought, a record dry spell he worries may only get worse.
There are 3 states in the Colorado River's lower basin, but the river's waters are not split equally.
In fact, Nevada enjoys just a fraction of the water rights granted to Arizona and California under the law of the river.
But the state still plays a very key role in the basin's future, even without the clout carried by its neighbors.
I think folks are starting to recognize that there are uncertain sources of supply, that our water supplies and our precipitation, our snowpack is becoming less and less reliable and less certain. And it's time to start exploring alternative supply development.
Thank you, Fritz. We're new best friends.
I am not the founder of the Public
I'm going to be
Policy
binge watching
Institute,
your unassisted living show on Tubi now forever. So yes, I am back. And earlier this morning, I mentioned how California's borders were crafted as far back as the early 1500s by recognition for the need of water. There is no doubt that the native peoples of the land that became California also saw water as critical to their survival. In the successive centuries, the vision of California became inextricably linked to the gold rush, morphing into the Golden State. The stunning natural beauty of California, its reputation as a land of opportunity and innovation, being the home of Hollywood and Silicon Valley, all of these fed a vision that motivated people from all over the world to come here and be a part of the Golden State. But the current reality of California is more complex than that. While it remains a hub for innovation and opportunity, it also faces significant challenges, and the metal that comes to mind is no longer gold, but iron, as we steel ourselves against successive fires, droughts, hornets, and the reality that the Padres may never capture a World Series in my lifetime. We have almost 200,000 Californians experiencing homelessness. We have residents exiting the state in large numbers for the first time. While our unstable revenue system produced a $97 billion surplus in 2022, it's on its way to being wiped out with a $23 billion deficit for 23 and a projected $31 billion deficit for 24. And if that weren't bad enough, our liabilities exceed our assets by $56 billion. We have immigrants coming here with all of the same dreams as our parents and grandparents had. But will the underlying economic, water, food, housing, power infrastructure be there for them as it was for those earlier generations and as it has been for us? So how do we plan for our water future? We are going to have a spicy conversation about that. But before we do, I want to give you a few brief examples of how others have planned for a very volatile future. One of my favorite authors is Peter Schwartz. He wrote a book called The Art of the Long View, Planning for the Future in an Uncertain World. It came out in 1991, and when I first read it back then, it was my first introduction to not only strategic, but scenario planning. Scenario planning is a form of strategic foresight in which an organization considers a variety of possible or probable futures. Have you ever wondered how some companies pivoted quickly and survived by transforming in their industry when there was a major change and others failed? Well, in 1992, 5 large companies, all of whom depended on TV advertising for their sales, hired Peter and his global business network, GBN, to develop 4 visions of the year 2006. And look at how electronic advertising, which was a glimmer on the horizon, how it might affect them. 3 of those visions were fairly conservative, and they preserved a great deal of the value of the existing companies. and assumed that electronic advertising would not fundamentally change the way they did business. But the fourth scenario assumed a radical transformation. It assumed that phone companies and cable companies would compete to provide high-speed interconnection, what they called the internet before we said the internet, and that TV programming would be available 24 hours a day on handheld devices, which is where you would get your information and watch ads, not on TV at home, not from newspapers. Remember, this scenario is being envisioned in 1992. It would be another 16 years before the iPhone comes out. It would be another 5 years before Amazon went public, and it would be another 10 years before Netflix offered monthly subscriptions. The fourth scenario disrupted all 5 of those companies' business models, and for one, it was a death knell. But all 5 embraced the fourth scenario, and they thrived. Those companies were ABC, Disney, Universal Studios, GE, and Bell Atlantic. Bell Atlantic would become Verizon Wireless. Perhaps one of the most important scenario planning efforts came in 2002 with the Department of Defense. The DoD had an Office of Net Assessments whose job it was to assess potential future threats that the rest of the DoD didn't have time to think about, a direct response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks that had occurred only months before. The head of the department, who was not content to examine threats only from humans, commissioned GBN to look at what would happen if there was a sudden increase or decrease in temperature, a scenario which actually occurred 8,500 years ago. It's called the 8.2 event, and occurred when the climate of Northern Hemisphere cooled rapidly in less than a decade and stayed cool, windy, and dry for almost a century. The scenario planning process showed that if this event occurred today, it would have devastating impacts on many parts of the world. But the process also yielded actions that the Pentagon immediately took to mitigate that, developing predictive climate models, assembling adaptive response teams, and adopting measures to make sure that agriculture would remain intact no matter what. It's important to stress this was scenario planning, not forecasting or predicting. But the effect of it made the Pentagon think about not only sudden climate change, but incremental change also. And some of the solutions that were developed for sudden climate change were determined to be beneficial for gradual climate change, particularly from a cost standpoint. Mr. Schwartz has also detailed where they got it very wrong. And in 2008, with the global financial crisis they did. When they were modeling financial risk scenarios in 2006 for an investment fund, they engaged an intellectual community that had inadequate diversity of viewpoints. That community rejected the idea that the deep global interconnectedness in the banking system, which had already been established, could yield a virtual meltdown, where a foreclosure in St. Louis ended up bankrupting small German communities in Germany whose money were in banks that had invested in funds that owned those bad mortgages. The intellectual community would not acknowledge the problem of banks not having to show off-the-book debt, and a problem that still exists today. He acknowledged that if they had included somebody from outside the banking community, academia, who were pointing this out privately but not publicly, his client might not have suffered those losses. Our final panel this morning will not suffer from a lack of diversity of viewpoints, nor does Southern California lack scenario planning, as Met is currently well into that process. But perhaps there are statewide scenario planning processes that could benefit all of us in the future and avoid missed opportunities. So, Adon.
Yes.
Let's kick this off. Am I on? Thank you. Let's kick this off with you. There's a room full of people here that they know what the problem is, right? And they know how to solve it. They will give you the answers. You heard it this morning. But it's just not that easy. We heard about those missed opportunities with the 57 water plan with CalFed. Should we take Met's Camp for Water process and make it Camp Fed for Water process?
Well, that's an interesting question, especially given the previous panel and their debate about climate change and whether everything could be blamed on it. But before I get into that, I may have to ask the following individuals for forgiveness for what I might say today. So I wanted to make sure I acknowledge them, including Director Jackie McMillan, who came all the way from Ventura County to be with us. We have Ty Fan from the city of Santa Ana, Carl Seckel, who represents MODOC, Larry Dick from MODOC, as well as Dennis Erdman. We have Linda Ackerman. I think Linda's here. I saw Dick Ackerman a little while ago. Steve Fessel, council member from the city of Anaheim, is with us today. Brenda Denstadt came all the way from Riverside. We have Michael Camacho from the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, and we also have former directors like Heather Repenning, who came from Los Angeles, and Brett Barbary, who's here, who's currently a board member and president of Yorba Linda Water District. But getting into this question, and I can't forget the boss himself, Adel Hadji Khalil, our general manager. So please welcome Adel, since I introduced him late. So to your question, the reason why I believe climate adaptation and the Climate Adaptation Master Plan, that's what Camp for Water makes sense as an organizing principle, is because this isn't the first time that we've confronted climate change. When the pioneers came from wherever they came to the land, and they saw land that didn't have rivers like they had back home. So they built aqueducts. They adapted the land to their needs. They also brought different kinds of crops that led to the vast agricultural industry that we have in California. So much about climate adaptation is knowing that we've reached a limitation. There's 20 million people in Southern California today. We're living in an era where the older infrastructure is crumbling, where there's issues about equity and government spending for infrastructure, where we're seeing this infrastructure succumb to weather events by any definition that could be devastating. So the question is, can we adapt and not adapt the land? And can we make use of our existing assets and then also leverage natural assets in a way that could bestow upon the people of Southern California a greater sense of equity in the way that we're spending our resources on water supply? The truth is also that I don't think we're ready for a statewide Camp for Water program, because I think that there's various interests who use climate change as a crutch for whatever it is that they want. And they'll insert studies and models to prove their point at the expense of everyone else. And I think that the Metropolitan Water District has this opportunity by our sheer size, the fact that we represent the 11th largest economy in the world, that we have a population of 20 million people, a $1 trillion economy, a vast geographic impact in whatever we do. It impacts what happens in the Bay Delta, on the Colorado River, and everywhere in between. And so I believe that we have an opportunity to model it. And if we succeed, it could be a template for the water supply chain. If we fail, it'll be an example for others to learn from our mistakes. And so from that perspective, I think we can't fail.
I would agree. Ed, the State Water Board is drawing up regulations to implement SB 1157, which will lower indoor and outdoor water use standards. Is this the best way to cope with water scarcity in California?
Okay, hold off on the graphic, because I want it to have maximum impact. I'm going to answer your question. May I have one of these?
Please. I mean, it's Voss.
Yeah, it's water. And the thing is, well, I'll use it as the metaphor later. But first, I have to tell you, I had imposter syndrome when I looked at the group of speakers. I thought to myself, wow, they're putting me on this stage with them. And then I was introduced as the president of the Public Policy Research Institute. So then I really got imposter syndrome, because I'm not.
We make up things.
I'm a co-founder and former president of the California Policy Center. I've been writing about water and energy and housing issues for about 10 years. So that's my actual credentials, and they're, as I say, humble compared to some of the folks that we've got up here. Now, may I have the graphic? You know, I just thought, this is ad-libbing, but that little fraction up at the top there, that tiny fraction, that would be about equivalent to this bottle of water compared to all the water that's been consumed today and probably tomorrow and for several rounds of events in this ballroom. This comes from the Public Policy Research Institute, this data. You can see in a wet year and in a dry year, these are average numbers over the past, I think about the last 20 years, 102, 103 million acre feet, 62 million acre feet. And a lot of the environmental water, to be honest, it's up on the north coast. You know, there is a tremendous amount of water that we don't perhaps need to go out into the ocean through the delta. But to be fair, a lot of the water you see as diverted for environment is not going through the delta. It's up in Mendocino and Humboldt County. Goes out to the ocean up there. Nonetheless, as you can see, urban water consumption varies not too much, 7.5, 8 million acre feet. One of the things I want to say about that is the last time we were down to 7.5 million acre feet as a running average was in 1985. It went up to 9 million acre feet, and then it came back down. And in 1985, there was 26 million Californians, and of course now we're at about 39. It's about 50% increase, but we've managed to use the same amount of water in that period of time. And then look there, the 0.4. That's what this, you know, ask yourselves, why are you accepting this? I mean, I don't want to be cynical. It's going to allow you to hire thousands of people to manage all of these dual meters, and I mean, it's going to cost. I believe Mesa's analysis. I don't believe the state's analysis. The state somehow came up with the idea that this would be a net economic benefit, and it absolutely isn't. And anyone with any common sense, I think, can understand that. You don't have to have a background in public finance to understand that. They underestimated so much when they talked about what the cost to implement this is going to be. And, you know, so even if it's a net, you know, zero sum where it yields as much as it takes, and that's very unlikely, you're only looking at 413,000 acre feet. I always laugh because you know, my profession was in finance, and you learn about rounding errors in engineering and finance, and I don't know where they came up with 413,000 acre feet. 412 might have been, you know, much more accurate. But, you know, the thing is, that's nothing. You say 400,000 acre feet, it's absolutely nothing for all these billions and billions of dollars and all of this intrusive regulations that are going to take away people's lawns, which, you know, you talk about heat island effect. There's good data from the Department of Energy that it's 40 degrees hotter on an artificial turf than it is on genuine turf. Now, that seems like so much. We all know that it's much hotter. And of course, we're also talking about washing machines that don't wash and dishwashers that you have to run the cycle more than once. The washing machines are just terrible. Why would anyone want one of those? My wife and I have a Whirlpool that I bought used for $50 in 1999, and Cameron comes around like once every 15 years to replace some little circuit on it. It still works really well. It wastes water, but so what? The water goes right back down, it gets treated, it goes back into the Sacramento River, gets used over again. How do you reuse indoor water? So, I mean, how do you waste indoor water? I understand we only get 85 to 90% back, but that's all you're really losing is the 10 to 15% that you can't recover when you recycle indoor water. So I could go on and on. I have a bunch of topics I wanted to cover, and that was just the first one. There's like 12 here. I better stop. But I really think that that's the point that just has to be emphasized the most is you're not saving anything. That 400,000 acre feet, that's equivalent to 100,000 acres of farmland, because you get 3 to 4 feet on every acre of irrigation in a typical crop. And they've got, what, 9, 10 million acres of irrigated farmland? So they'll get back 100,000 of it for $7 billion. Give it to those guys. Give them the $7 billion. Let them use it for the, Delta-friendly diversions, because they could probably build a lot for $7 billion. Why on earth are we putting all of our citizens through this misery in order to save 400,000 acre feet?
I'm still stuck on the fact that you do laundry. I am.
Did I say that?
Wow.
Sometimes.
You spoke with some knowledge there about that. Yeah. And actually, a little plug, if you go to Mesa Water District's website, they have a economic analysis of the implementation costs for 1157 on there, and it's worth your read. Mark, Huntington Beach Ocean Desal Project. What more can we say? Let's just. But Doheny, 18 years in the making, but we're, that still can happen. And they're working hard to try to make it happen. But in your opinion, why aren't more ocean desal projects being built in California? And are there any that make sense in the short term or the long?
Yeah, thanks for digging up some old wounds there, Lisa. No, I think, why aren't more being built? A couple main reasons. I think a major one is the continued uncertainty around the regulatory environment. For Poseidon to have invested so much time and energy on Huntington Beach, and to have the regulators constantly move the goalposts on them year after year after year, that was just a disgrace. Very, very disappointing. And unfortunately, that's soured the interest from other private investment companies and some public agencies as well. Another reason, these projects are complicated, they're expensive, and they require a lot of time and money to get through the entire process. But there's, it's not all doom and gloom. There is some good news. The state is trying to help. Back in August 2022, they released their water supply strategy, which called for increased production from desalination, which is great. We need it. But it also called for streamlined and expedited permitting, which is very important, and is also offering guidance on siting seawater desalination facilities in California. So all those are really good steps in the right direction. Recent draft documents that came out, they need a lot of work, and CalDesal and others are continuing to work with the state on these, but at least it's a step in the right direction, and we need to continue the collaboration. The feds are also trying to help as well through USBR and their grant programs. But we need to raise the per project cap and get more money in the pool. Right now there's a $30 million cap from USBR for these desal projects, and it's just not enough. So more money needs to go per project, and then with so many good projects in the hopper, we also need to increase that pool of money. So we're making progress there, but we need to keep engaging with our colleagues in DC. And what's going to make sense in the short term? Well, projects that can utilize subsurface intakes and commingle the brine with wastewater, that will get the path of least resistance from regulators. They've made that really clear. But is that going to get us where we need to be in terms of water reliability for the state? Probably not. So we need to keep pushing for larger projects like the Carlsbad desal project to be implemented in large population centers. A 50 MGD desal project that can utilize a subsurface intake, but it's located up in Humboldt County, that's not going to do anybody any good. So we're moving in the right direction, but we still all got to keep working together and keep collaborating.
Great. So Don, let's talk regionally about water, and specifically within your service area. Under varying climate change scenarios, MET's projecting significant shortfalls in supply. But demand also seems to be falling, regardless if it's a wet or dry year. I think we're starting to harden some of that conservation. So how is MET going to balance out the need for reliability and resilience, not overbuild, not jeopardize water affordability, and I'm sure you have like a magic wand that's going to make it all happen.
Well, no, I was going to take on Ed here because it's nice to know. It's nice to know that in Northern California, They don't need water-efficient washing machines. But here in Southern California, just look at what we've accomplished. In 1990, metropolitan sales were 2.3 million acre feet. This year, we might push 1.3 million acre feet. One of the more striking statistics that I was told by our staff was that metropolitan, with a 40% allocation from the State Water Project, is in storage conditions. This year, we were at above 100%, and we didn't have enough places to put the water. I think that as part of our climate adaptation master planning, we are dealing with these paradoxes. And for example, I believe that when we talk about overbuilding infrastructure, if you look at the prior era, what I call the pre-climate change era, yeah, you would say we're not going to build certain infrastructure because we want to make sure that we're maximizing its use. Well, look at where that got us. In the 1990s, we made the deliberate decision not to build a pipeline that could transport water from Diamond Valley Lake to the northern and some of the more western regions of our service area. And 7 million Southern Californians ended up having to go into steep, heavy water use reductions because we couldn't get the water to them. Yeah. The suggestion here is that in this era, where everybody's grappling with the issue of equity, we're going to have an infrastructure that is interconnected in ways that we little imagined. And that may improve over the long term, for example, the economics for things like desalination. And in fact, just south of here, we have one of our member agencies that has more water than they need. So as part of this balance, I think we need to be prepared for delivering the infrastructure of the future, a new class of infrastructure that we can more adeptly manage. And I think our board is grappling with that because there is no template for how to do that. In the old paradigm, we would say, we're not going to waste a mile of pipeline to a place that's not going to use it all the time. And today, the reality of it is that people expect water when they need it. And for us to face, for example, the worst case scenario, when we decided not to build the infrastructure to move Diamond Valley Lake water around the system, we were assuming that we would never face anything worse than a 20% state allocation. And we ended up with 0, and we had to fight our way back to get a health and safety allocation of 5%. So this is a different era by any measure. When the pioneers were here, they could afford the luxury of the kind of infrastructure that we built. But with 20 million people now and a $1 trillion economy at stake, I don't think that we can risk it. And I just have to tell you one lesson I got early on. When I first got into the water industry, I used to work for Rich Atwater, and he was the general manager at West and Central Basin. And he was opposed to the construction of Diamond Valley Lake because his feeling was that we could, or our feeling was that we could remediate the San Gabriel Basin and get over double the storage capacity. So I talked to Brian Thomas. Many of you know Brian Thomas, and this was 30 years ago. And I was going on, and he said, well, stop right there. He said, you're missing the main point of Diamond Valley Lake. The main point of Diamond Valley Lake is in the event that there's a major calamity that cuts us off of our imported sources, and then we could push that water throughout the service area. If that scenario were to happen, what would be the value of that water? And the answer is the value of the economy itself. Mm-hmm. And I'm suggesting that with 20 million people and a $1 trillion economy, we need to step up our thinking about the value of our work.
To that end, are you happy with the 4 scenarios? I know you're right. What you're doing hasn't been done before. But just like the scenario where you never thought you would get less than 20% from the state, are you confident or happy that you've looked at a range of scenarios there?
I think the staff has done exhaustive work. And the real challenge here is not the staff. The real challenge is educating the supply chain about those scenarios so that every member of the supply chain, all the way down to the retail level, can be able to communicate back to us not only their needs, but their threshold of risk and pain. And I think that unless we have this honest conversation across the region, we're going to be continued to be bedeviled by these issues of equity, where if we build something in one part of the service area that we incentivize, another part of the service area says, well, because I didn't get a direct benefit, it's of no value to me. So we need a new reason to think together. And I hope that climate adaptation, in the manner that I've just defined it, can be an organizing principle for the region.
Right. Ed, dam removal.
How's that? The what?
Dam removal.
Oh, dam removal. Well, you know, first of all, my washing machine, if I didn't have to buy one that required a software subscription and could do my laundry in less than an hour and a half and wouldn't damage my clothes, I would be happy to buy one. So, but you know, you and I agree on the need to invest in a lot more infrastructure, and you may surprise you, but I lived many years in Southern California, and I absolutely think about the state as a unitary entity, and we have to think together about how to solve these problems.
That was too nice.
No, it was honest. but the dams, you know, the question with dam removal is, where does it end, I suppose. You know, we have 60 million people living in the Southwest United States who, you know, we wouldn't have this great civilization in the Southwest and the Far West without dams. So, you know, where do you stop? There's some really small dams. There's a few in Southern California. They're 100 years old. They're completely silted up. They have no storage capacity. And if there's a way to remove them, you know, we probably should. You know, maybe we can bring back some steelhead in the Ventura River or something like that. Get rid of that dam. And then you work your way into the bigger dams. You know, there's the one on the Eel River that is going to probably come out. There's two of them, actually. One's Lake Pillsbury, 74,000 acre-feet of storage. You're starting to get into something with a little bit of significance, especially for a small rural community. That's a lot of water for them. And it also, the dam that's immediately downstream from that lake is actually a diversion dam, and they bring 70,000 acre-feet a year into the Russian River. And the cities on the Russian River and the farmers need that water. And there's a very good chance they're not going to get it anymore. Which, you know, I don't know, at what point do we want to bring in the environmentalist factor? There's just an unyielding sentiment coming from the environmentalist community, it seems to me, and I don't want to be too hyperbolic here, that nothing is acceptable anywhere. And that sort of has to be pushed back against more successfully. You know, you get up into the Klamath Basin, and here's an example where you really need to hire experts to contradict the experts, because the experts aren't necessarily right. They're going to take those 4 dams out, and they estimate anywhere from 20 to 60 million acre-feet of silt is going to wash down the Klamath River, and it's going to take a very long time for that silt to work its way through. It's going to smother the gravel beds where the salmon spawn, and the story gets even better because 20 million years ago, I don't know if it was Mount Lassen, there was a volcanic explosion, and lava flows went across the whole upper Klamath Basin, and there's phosphate. It's phosphate-rich dirt. And the Klamath River, they're actually intending, after they remove the 4 dams, to blast a channel through the lava flows to give the salmon a better chance of going into the upper river. And there actually isn't any good proof that salmon ever went up into the upper river. And this is all phosphate-rich silt that's going to get dumped down into the lower Klamath. The upper Klamath River, the Klamath River Project about 100 years ago enabled the irrigation of 200,000 acres of some of the best wheat and barley and horseradish and onions. And I forget, I was trying to memorize 8 of them because I learned there was at least 8 high-value, high-altitude crops, best soil in the world to grow those crops. And that is going to go away. And the reason it's going to go away is because the experts think that you have to have more water in the lower Klamath in order to give the salmon more of a chance. But there's other experts that are saying, first of all, historically, whenever it floods the upper Klamath, it runs off into the Tule Lake. which, by the way, the farmers compromised and set aside 50,000 acres to preserve the Tule Lake, and it's a win-win because it refills the aquifers. But the floodwaters from the upper Klamath never went down into the lower Klamath historically. But they want to do that to drive out the parasites, which are nurtured by the phosphorus, the phosphates, which come from the volcanic runoff. So you're making a mistake, theoretically, to do that, and when they take away the 4 dams in the mid-Klamath between the upper and lower, they're not going to have any water except from the Link River Dam way upstream, which is what the farmers use to regulate their, and the wetlands, they regulate the water coming out of there. I could go on and on about the Klamath River, and the only point I'm trying to make is, you know, if you guys were sending $10 million or $40 million to the tribes up there, and if you guys were hiring people the way the organization that I was mistakenly identified with is willing to talk about with their perspective on this whole thing, if you're willing to go out and find experts that do this kind of research, and this is just an example, and I've talked to some of the people, and how much money do you think they've got up in the farmers that are, you know, they're on a subsistence kind of business model. They can't, and there's not that many of them. How are they going to go out? And they hired one guy, you know, and he did a lot of research, and I talked with him, and I learned all of this. But what they've got are armies of people that are saying something that's completely contradictory. And what really happened? They had dams that they either had to build fish ladders, it would have cost them $500 million to put up the fish ladders, or they would demolish the dams, which cost them $500 million. They're not, the utility isn't going to fight that. They had a chance to give it to a coalition of environmental groups and walk away, and then they wouldn't have to spend $500 million. So when they say, oh, it wasn't an economical project and this and so forth, well, no, not if you want to build the fish ladders. But anyway, I went on and on. You know, the fact is we have dams that we simply can't live without. And when they did the 1957 water plan, they identified 49 sites for off-stream reservoirs, which you can't even make the case that an off-stream reservoir is, you know, harming a wild river. And then they narrowed that down to 12, and then they narrowed it down to 4, and Sites is one of those 4. There's some other places. Sites is probably a pretty good place to put an off-stream reservoir. And Temperance Flat, I'll finish with this. Temperance Flat, it's south of the Delta, so you get away from all the controversy about tunnels and diversions. It would have been full this year. If they built it in the amount of time that it took to build San Luis, it would have been done by now because the voters approved it in 2014. And you can have pump storage because there's the Millerton Lake right beneath with the Friant Dam, right beneath where the site of the Temperance would be. You know, San Luis, it's 450 megawatts for about 4 or 5 hours every day. They pump it up with all the surplus solar electricity, and then they let it back down and generate 450 megawatts for several hours during peak demand. That's the cheapest form of storage we've got. Batteries aren't there yet, and you could do that as well with Temperance Flat. A couple of acres is a megawatt. If you do 2 acres, it depends on the head. Okay, I don't want to get over my head, but you know, you could have tremendous multiple benefits if you built a few of these dams. And if there's already a dam on the river, why can't you put one behind that one? Why can't we build off-stream reservoirs? So, you know, bottom line is we can't do without dams, and I hope I've helped share some thoughts about that are useful.
No, thank you. It always strikes me when we talk about some of these environmental benefits that we've achieved, I can't find a place that has a summary of all of those, right? Because we can find where water supplies are, we can find how much, you know, dam capacity we have, but I'd love to, you know, be able to tell someone that since 1982, we have done all of these projects and they have yielded these benefits. Mm-hmm. So let us have a dam.
Yeah,
you know, we've restored all this stuff. Let us have a dam.
Or fill up those aquifers. You know, think of an aquifer as an underground dam.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a big fan of aquifers. There's yes. so much capacity. Why not?
So Mark, salinity management. You know, we're talking about water in the future, but no one really talks about the impact that bringing all of this imported water into those groundwater basins is having on the salinity of those basins. How important is desal in the future?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Lisa. You know, salinity management, very complex issue. It affects different parts of the states differently, you know, from the Central Valley to the Inland Empire. all have unique set of challenges there. In general, like you said, it relates to the buildup of salts and groundwater supplies. And that's going to impact everything from crop production to reliable, safe, cost-effective drinking water supplies. I was thinking about this, and it just, where we live, Orange County, I mean, it's a great example of where potable reuse and seawater desalination can help with this issue. So, like you said, by bringing in less imported salty Colorado River water and replacing that with low salinity water replaced by reverse osmosis, whether that's potable reuse or ocean desal, we're improving the quality of the groundwater over time. The Doheny Ocean Desal project, for example, that would be a great example of that for South Orange County, much like GWRS has been for Northern Orange County. And people talk about the high cost of these projects, potable reuse and desal, but there's a real economic benefit to having that low TDS water supply, not only to your households, for your fixtures, for the washing machines, but also for businesses. The refineries, the breweries, all those industries that currently spend water to treat high TDS water, those costs can start to go down, and everyone benefits in that scenario.
I'm always struck with how important local water is. Don, you've talked about it several times at the meetings, and having that emergency day and having those local supplies. Those non-potable reuse projects, brackish water, all of those things are local projects. We have control over them, right? So yeah, I think there is a key element there in our future for that. Not to put words in your mouth. Funding, Don, funding for the water supply future. How are we going to fund what we need to do and still keep it affordable?
Well, let me first tackle the affordability question. I think in our society there's a general agreement in California, whether it's well codified or not, on the human right to water and the fact that everybody deserves to have water for their basic needs. At Metropolitan, as part of our climate adaptation master planning, we're taking it in the planning phase in 3 parts. The first part is to address to what degree we need to be involved in a low-income rate assistance program that's universal for the residents of the state. That's an extremely complex area because it involves investor-owned utilities that already have such a program, many municipal utilities, and in fact some of our member agencies that retail have found non-water generated revenue with which to help their poor people. But we need to have that discussion in terms of how that fits within the regional metropolitan framework. The second one was addressed this morning by my friend Bill Jones and by my friend Darcy Burke, who were talking about our regulatory regime. I'd like to suggest that our regulatory regime is not meant for the conditions that we're in today. Whether you're calling it climate change, whether you're looking at it from the perspective of growth and population, it doesn't fit. And the reason it doesn't fit is because in many respects, as Jason Phillips said, it's about feelings. It's not about science. In California, when the Department of Health surrendered the Division of Drinking Water to the State Water Control Board, the statute that runs the Division of Drinking Water was taken as a whole into the State Water Code over with the State Water Resources Control Board and CalEPA. And what surprises people is to realize that one person controls whether there's a public health goal that has to be researched and whether there's a maximum contaminant level that's either going to be set or revised. And this person does not require a peer review of scientists, doesn't require a formal approval by the State Water Resources Control Board. That one person can trigger billions of dollars in cost. And despite everything that we've talked about today, whether it's desal or doing the Pure Water SoCal program, our major cost driver is meeting these requirements. That's the main impediment to affordability, and I'd like to suggest that I think our regulators are probably our major obstacle towards climate adaptation in California. The third are the costs that we control. And we need to take at Metropolitan on a regional level a very close look at that. From the 1990s, the late 1990s, up until the debate about the Delta tunnels ended, a few years ago when the governor simplified it down to one tunnel and a reset, Metropolitan spent about $500 million, both in pursuing conveyance and goodwill gestures. And today, we have less reliability than we had when we started spending that money. I don't think it's hard to agree that we cannot afford to continue making investments that we get no return for. And so those are the major factors related to affordability. In terms of revenue, I think our general manager has broken new ground over the last 2 years. Metropolitan, for the first time, started seeking major grants for our own infrastructure. We're doing all the studies on Pure Water SoCal with an $80 million grant from the state. We're pursuing hundreds of millions of dollars from the Inflation Reduction Act. I can't tell you how much because it would ruin our game plan. But 40% of that money, whatever we get, will be dedicated to underserved communities to fix leaky pipes and failing infrastructure that's in bad need of repair. And so I think that we have new ways of dealing with funding revenues, but I think that high rates and rate increases are unavoidable. My hope in that is from looking at consumer preferences. Our recent surveys, our surveys back in the early 2000s indicated that it was mostly immigrants and rich people that preferred bottled water. And, immigrants because of where we came from and our distrust and our heritage and coming here and not knowing the governance and how we run water. Rich people because of the convenience of bottled water. Well, here we are over 20 years later, and our recent survey found that a majority of the general population prefers bottled water. Let's think about what that means. Right now, on average, a gallon of tap water costs a third of a penny. And those same consumers that would vote against our rate increases gladly pay $1 a gallon for that same water from that same source. If you look at it from a business perspective, we're leaving money on the table. And my suggestion to us is that we're doing it because we have not asserted our value proposition. And I think that's something that Darcy talked about this morning. We need to show that the value of what we do is the value of the economy itself. And if we fail, it doesn't matter what else happens, because life pretty much the way we know it would change. And regretfully, for example, we're seeing that right now. It's a war tactic in Israel right now and what's happening in Gaza, where you have a whole area that's thinner than and smaller than Southern California. It's 7 miles by 20 odd miles that will probably not be able to recover for a long, long time. So I'd like to say that unless we realize a greater appreciation for our value proposition, it won't take a war to place us in the same position in Southern California.
That's sobering thought. So, Ed, do we have enough water supply to support the 2.5 million new housing units by 2030 in the state?
Yes. Shall I elaborate? Yes. I love your point about the bottled water, because every time, for example, for the Desal plant, which is big loss to not get that twin to Carlsbad built, and the analysis was, well, it could cost some households another $100 a year. And as I guess your data indicates, they're spending $50 a month on bottled water. So there really is a trade-off there that could be, if you could make it happen somehow, that would be a lot of money to fund a lot of these types of projects. Orange County, just with the Desal and the projects they have in the works, is on track. You need the Desal to get independent of imported water. And we talk about climate change, but you alluded to other catastrophes that could occur. It could be as little as a cyber attack takes out some of these pumps, and you have water. We've banked 20 million acre feet of water, but it's up north of the Delta somewhere, and the Tehachapi pumps are down. How are you going to get that water? So you want to strive for water independence in every southern coastal county. And you guys are getting real close. And I guess where we would disagree is I do think there's a way to have abundant water to the point where, you don't have to get, I think it's another 17% cut through conservation. God, man, just find the 17% and let people keep their lawns and, maybe plant trees again, because we have new ways to track gang activity in South Central LA, so we don't have to, we can put the trees back. They chopped all the trees down. And that's true. And the other thing is, when you stop watering lawns, the trees adapted. The mature trees on these lawns, they grew depending on surface irrigation to sustain them. So you're going to lose potentially, trees proportional to how much lawn that you take out. But where can where would you find all this water? We're taking 18 million acre feet a year out of the ground, and we can't do that anymore. We're getting 5 million acre feet off the Colorado River, and we aren't going to get that much anymore. And so how are we going to do it? Desal is a tremendous way to have resiliency in terms of a diverse water supply. The Israelis are on track to desalinate 1 million acre feet a year. I think they're over 500,000 already. And the price, the capital cost for the Sorek plant in Ashkelon it was 1/5 what Carlsbad cost. The capital cost per unit of output, 1/5. And so, get some good financial auditors and find out where that money went. I think you're going to find that most of it went to redundant engineering studies and litigation and lobbying and all kinds of pre-planning expenses. You can't, you have to reform the cost structure somehow, even though the money's there. We can find the money, but you can't build all of these projects if you don't figure out how to do it for less money. So there's got to be some streamlining of the regulatory environment, which everybody else has said. But to find big volumes of water, I think that the Delta diversion project is something until we know that it can't work, for goodness sakes, invest in there with a sense of urgency and find out, because we have 10 million acre feet in any average year that is, during the rainy months, is in excess of what they need for the ecosystems. And even though that bar is just like you talked about, we went from parts per billion to parts per trillion, the same sort of thing is analogous to what's happening with the environment, which again is why you have to hire more experts to push back against some of these studies. If you're going to raise the bar in terms of how much environmental water you need every year perpetually, you can't build your way past every time you build more supply capacity, you're going to have higher standards for the environment. So there has to be, maybe stop putting limits on bass fishing, because that's what's happening to the salmon. The bass are eating them. And that would cost nothing. In fact, you might sell more tags to the fishermen.
So you're saying there isn't enough water?
There is enough water if you change the regulatory environment and do some common sense things like allow people to fish for bass, and then come up with a delta diversion project that's palatable to all of the parties involved, because it looks like that could be a real opportunity. And the rest is, runoff. The Pacific Institute, right before the vote on desal, right before the Coastal Commission had that vote, in April of 2022, they came out with a study that said you're going to get up to 3 million acre feet a year from urban runoff harvesting and another 2 million acre feet from recycling. I think those numbers are inflated, but even if you got half that much, you'd be exporting water to the farms. So invest in those projects, and you have to do it anyway. The nitrogen that's going into the San Francisco Bay, 400,000 acre feet here, the nitrogen that's going into the Santa Monica Bay, and all, you guys are more familiar with what's coming down the pike over here, but that outfall is hurting the environment. It's one of the reasons they want to put so much water out of the Delta and through the San Francisco Bay, is to stop the toxic algae blooms that are nourished by the stuff that they're still pumping into the bay. The wastewater isn't sufficiently treated. So you get a double benefit. You get a benefit to the environment, and you also get all that water back if you do urban wastewater recycling. So I think between desalination, wastewater recycling, urban runoff harvesting and something more creative with the delta and in off-stream reservoirs that get some of this other runoff that's coming out of the Sierras, you could definitely get enough water for, and the water, I'm almost done.
Okay.
The water project was 10 million acre feet. That's what the 57 plan was going to have for urban. You get back to 9 and you'll have plenty of water for 2.5 million more homes.
Okay. Mark, what do you want people to know about ocean or brackish water desal?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things everyone in this room needs to know so we can spread the word is that the environmental concerns are drastically overstated of the impacts of seawater desalination. That's right. If I hear terms like sucking in marine life and toxic briny sludge one more time, I'm going to go nuts. Yeah. Take a look at this video, and this is really what happens under the ocean. This is an operating seawater intake at the Perth Seawater Desalination Plant in Australia. Guy seems to be doing okay to me.
His bubbles are getting sucked in.
And this is brine diffuser. So not diluted with wastewater. This is brine from a 50% recovery seawater desalination plant. Again, doesn't look like toxic briny sludge to me.
Wow.
My favorite's coming up. Wait for it. Wait for it. Seahorse.
Aww. Look at him.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So that's one thing.
Yeah.
And there's the silent majority broadly supports seawater desalination in the state. Poll after poll show that there's broad public support for this. There's willingness to pay for it. So that's what grinds my gears, Lisa.
Great. Okay. We want to have time for questions, so we're going to do a lightning round really fast here. I know we've all kind of anointed Darcy the water czar already, but you don't have it yet, Darcy. So, Adon, give us your water czar vision.
Well, as Darcy's assistant, I would propose that we have climate adaptation as an organizing principle, which I think I already staked my claim on. And that involves ultimately, in the ideal world, creating, not reforming the regulatory process, but having a regulatory process for water that's befitting of our times, that meets the needs of affordability and public health protection. That would forge cooperation not only with ag, but also recognize our interdependence. I'm a graduate of the California Ag Leadership Program, and I was also on the State Board of Food and Ag for 7 years. And I remember Al Matna led us on an investigation through the U.S. Army College, where they were assessing what the elements are in maintaining public stability. Mm-hmm. And Leon Panetta was our guide. And the number one factor was food prices. And soon enough, Mr. Panetta became Chief of Staff to President Obama, and we saw the Arab Spring that erupted because of food prices. And then I think the third one is a recognition, and I'm going to focus on the Delta, that we're not going to restore the Delta. Secretary Jones talked about the CalFed process, which I believe came before its time. The term restoration is in the Delta, but if you look at the projects that were included in the CalFed program, they aspired to stabilize the Delta. It recognized that the Delta's 200-year-old landscape was crudely altered with a system of levees, suffered from agricultural pollution, and the things we've done. The environment hasn't had a chance for 200 years. And if the CalFed program had been fully realized, the environment would have had a chance finally. The little communities and the farms in the Bay Delta would not be fearing to this day for flooding events. And let me remind you, according to Jeffrey Mount in 2002, he predicted that we were within a 50-year horizon of a major calamity in the Delta that would cost enormous sums, including our fresh water supplies. And so I think that we need to reset this dialogue. And Adele and several of our directors, Jackie and others, we were in the Delta just about 2 months ago, where the farmers basically told us that they're beginning to see higher salinity levels and lower crop yields. And the fact that, you know, we've been debating what to do with these Delta islands that we purchased in order to stage the Delta Conveyance Project, which are right now in debate, to say the least. And they want us to stay.
Oh, I thought I'd die when I heard the Restore the Delta lady say, don't leave. I didn't want you to come, but don't leave.
That's right. So there's hope in the air, and under Darcy's leadership, as the waters are, I would hope that she would delegate this responsibility. Thanks.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the regulatory element there. You know, that guy who has that incredible bureaucratic power to set those regs. Yeah,
Don't say his name.
Yeah, I won't.
You might get in trouble.
I know. I know. Ed, your waters are.
Waters are.
What are you going to do?
You know, a couple of years ago, I tried to put on the ballot something we called the Water Infrastructure Funding Act, which streamlined the regulatory environment and called for 2% of the state general fund. Darcy, I like your 5% better. It provided to finance the 2% stream, so you could unlock, you know, $40, $50 billion right away. So you might want to add a financing provision to the revenue stream. But you know, I don't have a lot to add. I think that the state and the federal government, if you can get them involved, have to subsidize capital projects. You're either going to do it on the front end by subsidizing the capital projects, or you're going to, and this is a libertarian argument, you're going to have all kinds of expenditures to subsidize the low-income households forever if you don't create that water abundance. You know, so abundance and affordability and resilience and sustainability and equity, you know, in many respects are all synonymous. You know, and I just think that that's something to really think about when you're trying to decide where to put the money. But, you know, I like your plan and I like your money, so I should probably just, there you go.
Mark.
All right, I would have the state take a much more meaningful role in advancing large-scale seawater desalination projects. And we've talked about the multiple benefits that all these projects have across the state. There's no reason they shouldn't be doing more. Another way to look at this, and not to pile on from what a previous speaker said, but what would be more beneficial to the state? A $10 billion partially constructed high-speed rail in the Central Valley, or $10 billion worth of Carlsbad seawater desalination projects up and down the coast? That's what I would do.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. We're going to turn to Q&A here in the last couple minutes that we have available. Oh.
Thank you so much for all of you guys giving grateful information. I realize, just listening to all the panel and the speaker, is that I realize, you know, we have a lot of issue regarding coming to solution of how to get more water for the people in a cheaper manner, and then also the involvement of politics. And as my name is Amy Fan West, I'm a councilwoman of the city of Westminster, and I'm thinking about it in a political aspect of how I can maneuver in that area to push your guys' agenda in a way to bring more water to the people. And I think that's what it takes, you know, the partnership between other water agency and the partnership of elected official who has the same value like us. And I think it's important, and that dialogues need to continue. But I guess my question to you guys is, what would you like our elected official to push for and to do in a local, state, and federal level?
Well, I've been working on that for the last 10 years as a co-founder of a program called Water Education for Latino Leaders. And let me tell you what a Latino leader is. It's anybody that serves the Latino community. And so we've had a great diversity of local elected officials go through the program. And I just want to encourage as many local elected officials to understand the basics of water. One of my frustrations on our inspection trips, we take groups of council members and local leaders out to the Colorado River, and we bombard them with information. And I don't know how many times I've run into people, council members and leaders, that I ask, and what did you learn? And the lesson is, well, I saw your great facilities, they're so clean, but I really can't remember because it was so much information, I couldn't absorb it. And my thinking since then has been, if only we could provide them with the basic framework so that they could take what we're telling them and put it in the right slot so that they have a comprehensive knowledge of the water system. And then the second one is, I think that the NGO community has really taken over speaking for local elected officials. Many of these NGOs are under tremendous pressure to produce quick wins. And let me give you one example. There was a bill by Senator Dodd, SB 3, I won't get into the details, but it required small water systems, including many small communities, to adopt certain procedures in shutting off customers that larger systems have to adopt. In another association I helped to run, didn't oppose it. We went and said to him, yeah, but there's all these communities that don't have the ability to withstand the loss of revenue. They don't have the ability to come up with brochures in 5 different languages when only one language is spoken in their communities. Can you put some money in there? And the answer that we got back was, well, we really don't want to put any money in it because then we'd have to go into the Appropriations Committee. Mm-hmm. And we forced them into the Appropriations Committee, and then they came up with a fund with no funding source. So, and this is happening with legislation that impacts safe drinking water that costs communities billions of dollars. And so we need educated city council members, mayors, local officials who suffer the consequences of this, speaking up for themselves. Because if you don't, there's a bunch of other people that need to fill their fundraising coffers doing it for you.
We have somebody in the back here, unless we've got somebody else ready to ask a question. Well, Jim, why don't you go ahead, and then, ma'am, we can have you do it. And I'm sorry, I probably know you, but I just can't see you.
That's right. Well, yeah, Jim Atkinson with Mesa Water District. And Lisa, as you know, I have been a proponent of educating folks on activities between the North and the South.
Yes.
And most of our panels this morning have had folks from the North and folks from the South. And I would just encourage people to take every opportunity to join with the Met tours that go up to the Delta. They are very educational, and would encourage folks to look more at what the projects in Northern California look like so that we can share with them what we're doing here in Southern California.
Jim, you are the father of mountain county relationships with Southern California, so thank you for all that. That lady right back there had
yes, and then we have
question.
One here too.
Oh, okay. Well.
Hi, I'm Leslie Cleveland, and I'm with the Bureau of Reclamation in the Temecula office. So all of you, many of you, I work with, and you get our funding.
Oh, I knew you.
So I do want to, it's more of a statement than a question. First of all, I want to applaud all of you for those small projects. There are things happening. So don't think that this is like, you know, we hear about all these big projects. Well, we have Title 16, we have the drought, we have, you know, infrastructure under the resiliency. So I do want to say that there are positive things happening. You are doing a wonderful job. And many of you I work with on a daily basis. So with that said, we have $14 billion. You want my money. You want to talk to me. We have 8 NOFOs right now out on the street. So for saying that, you know, you can't find funding, I don't buy it. I'm sorry, I don't buy it.
Can you give us more money per project?
Pardon me?
Can you give us more money per project?
Apply. Apply.
There's a cap.
Yeah. On Title 16, you're correct. But you need to go to, that's a congressional thing.
Right.
That's not Bureau of Reclamation makes that determination. So, but you are doing a fabulous job. Dahoney, I started doing that as a project manager with Richard Bell.
Aw.
I had no idea. I came from DOD. I was a strategic and tactical weapons system operations officer as a civilian, and I came to water. All I knew was you turn on the tap, water came out. The first person I met was from MODOC, was Carl Seckel and Richard Bell. They showed it to me, and Dahoney was one of the projects that Reclamation worked on. So we have a lot of funding that we have available. There are 8 right now NOFOs. Go out on grants.gov, get your folks out there. The other thing is I'd like to also commend Darcy. I think she's right on with accountability and courage. It takes a lot. I think we all know that. But I also want to say that I'm a consumer, just like you. I don't like to pay more water, but I'm visual. I like Starbucks every day. $6 a little Starbucks. Put that in water, visual. People are visual. Our consumers are visual. They want to see it. We don't want to see numbers up there. If you want to get buy-in from your consumers, give them the visual. Somebody, I think, talked about the water, the water bottles up there. Thank you. That was a great visual. That's what we need to share with our consumers. We are all consumers in here. What do we like to see? We like to see the visuals. So I just wanted to say, I've been coming to this for 15 years. So I came to the very first one. I come every year. I look forward to it. And I think it's a great message. So I do want to commend all of you that I work with. We have 156 water districts. We have about 56 or 60 sanitation districts. And we work with 31 tribes just in our office. And we're right here in Temecula. Reach out to me if you have any questions about funding.
Okay, I just want to make sure I have this right. You're a weapons specialist. You have offers on the street and a lot of money to give out. Think you're going to be popular. Really? Absolutely. Okay, we have another question back here. I know, I see Dennis had his hand up. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Hi, this is Zach from One Water P3. Great panel discussions today. My key takeaways are 3 things. We all want to build water infrastructure for the next generation and different water infrastructure. But the obstacles we have is feelings first. Obviously, that's a big thing. Enviros, and I think Mark covered a regulatory environment in California. So as an industry, what can we do to reform how water infrastructure projects get approved? Should we take something, copy energy industry, and make one commission that's responsible for approving those? Or what are the alternatives to make sure that, Adon, like you said, your climate adaptive plan can be implemented in the future?
Well, I'll lead off on this. I think that, we're in an era where, as has been stated earlier, we're going to have to take risks as an industry as we move to adapt into an environment where we have these wild swings, where we have failing infrastructure. And I know that there's a frustration in all of the studies that are involved in making progress. In the aerospace industry, for example, Elon Musk has really expanded the use of rockets through what he calls a fail-fast strategy, where there's measured risks that are taken in order to discover the art of the possible that you could accomplish in a shorter amount of time. I think we need to do that on the regulatory front in areas that do not harm human health or pose a threat to human health or drastic damage to the environment. Because if we don't, I think that every time there's a study, every time there's a proposal on the street, in our litigious society, it falls victim to court challenges, permit challenges, all kinds of challenges. So there are things within our means where we can invite innovation. Maybe some of it involves it not germinating within our industry. At Metropolitan 20 years ago, we created the Innovative Conservation Program, where we encourage private sector individuals to prove their technology so that they could become eligible for our conservation credit. We may need to extend ourselves that way when we're looking at other types of projects. I'm also on the board of a group called Sustainable Conservation, which is a very entrepreneurial group that tries to find ways to cut the green tape on conservation programs. Maybe we can expand the definition of that in order to be able to expedite permits that are required for some of the projects that we're building. But I think overall, we're going to have a sense of urgency. I see a lot of the factors that bedevil us as the luxury problems. We have the luxury of having these drawn-out debates. Why? Because nothing drastic has happened.
Yeah.
And in the void, we get muddled. But I think that there is a looming crisis, and it's going to take us by surprise. And as long as we're not making our best efforts to get ahead of it, we're going to rightfully have to share the blame. So I think we need to get busy, we need to extend ourselves, and we need to reach out to the unusual suspects in our society that may be able to bring solutions to the table.
If I can, I'm going to take a little moderator privilege. Your point about should we have, this energy kind of model where we have, this entity at the state level that just looks over all that, and arguably that's the State Water Resources Control Board. But I want to talk about Australia because so many people will cite that as an example of what went right when they nationalized their water, and they have this one overarching entity that controls water now. Well, I watched Australian Parliament, and if you've never done that, it's very, very interesting, really hectic and hard to follow sometimes. But someone had come to their representative to say they can't be heard about water anymore in their little township. They were really having a problem, and they can't get through the bureaucracy now, which they could have when they had their local water authority there. So sometimes my thought is just that may not be the problem. Yeah, we have many voices here about water, but the issue is I don't think that there's not a czar up there as much as it is a lack of will. I think you've heard that a lot today, is to find the political will to move forward.
Let me suggest we have it at Metropolitan.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Last question in the back here. Hi, I have a question for all three contestants, and it's getting late, so it's going to be an A or B answer, just an A or B.
Contestants.
A is you have the federal government and the state government give out a lot of little grants and loans and trinkle gifts among all the different districts. That's A. B is they take all that money, they pull it together, and let me go back to A for a second. They trickle the grants among projects that probably would get built anyways, but they're going to give every district, $1 million or $500,000 or $5 million. Or B, they funnel all that money together, they pull it together, they build new large water supply projects that might not have been built but for that money. You want A or do you want B?
Let's start with
I'll
Mark.
start.
Oh, okay.
That's what we call a false binary. Because obviously there are elements, essential elements in both of those. So I would have to say A.5 and B.5, however you, half A, half B. That's my answer.
And I'll go B if we can implement an Australian model whereby the majority of these desal projects built with state government participation, it was done under an alliance model where the state partnered with private industry in a pain share, gain share project delivery method. If things went wrong, they all suffered. If things went right, everything was good. So the state government in those types of situations can be helpful.
That could be
arguably the San Diego model too.
In a way, yep.
Well, I have to be frank, and that is that we've already done both. We've done the distributed projects. That's how we started. And we've done the centralized projects. I mean, what's Hoover Dam? And the question is, where did it get us? And it got us to today. And we're in a different era where we're going to have to be more dynamic because all the answers are not even in government anymore. You have the private sector now, for example, injecting itself into a war through their satellite system in the Ukraine. You have the private sector involved in warfare in other ways with these drones. I think that the bottled water industry represents the same to us because the major threat here isn't that there isn't money. It's that we're not realizing our full capacity of the money that could be available if we had the public's confidence. And so I think to go back and do what we've been doing for the last 100 years might work in some discrete circumstances, but I don't think it'll work for the region or for the state.
Absolutely. We're not going to wait this time and get the cut off. We're going to say thank you very much to our panelists.